my good fortune is your good fortune.
When the Star Trek universe had its humble beginning in 1966, there is no doubt in people's mind that Q were the most powerful species in that universe. The all-knowing, all-seeing species set in motion some of the key events in the story. But truly, how powerful are they? How far do they see? How much do they know? In this origin video, we take a deep dive into the Q continuum and become all-knowing when it comes to the Q. Before we go into our explanation, we have a very small request. If you like our content, please support us by subscribing to our channel. This is a small click for you, but for us, it means a lot. Thank you. Let's begin.
Au contraire, mon capitaine! He's back!
Who are the Q, and why are they so important in the Star Trek universe? Since the premiere of Star Trek in 1966, it has captured the hearts of audiences with its vast universe and multitude of characters. However, one of the more prominent characters that have stuck with everyone has to be Q. Played by the handsome John DeLancey, Q is a non-corporeal entity that is not human and omnipotent. In order to understand Q and their whole deal, we first have to understand the whole mess of the terminology that comes with the species. So there's this space, an extra-dimensional plane of existence. This is known as the Q continuum. This is where Q resides. Q is the name of the species, but then to make matters more confusing, each individual member of the species is also called Q. So if you are in the Q continuum, congratulations! You will never forget anyone's name because everyone is named Q. Why are they named this way? Oh, it's because they have developed so much that they have essentially incomprehensible for us humans to understand. Language is a construct. Physical form is just an idea. Why have names that can distinguish you from the rest when all of you can simply be Q? And as far as the personality is considered, oh boy, if you have seen The Big Bang Theory, you may have had moments where you found the Klingon-speaking genius Sheldon quite egotistical. Well, Q is definitely where he got it from because Q is as infuriating as his father. Q always needs to be in control. He's chaotic and brash. Manipulation comes easily to him, and his inflated ego would probably serve as a life jacket for me if he's thrown off the ship. However, despite all these traits that can be mildly infuriating at some points, it's what makes Q so lovable and a fan favorite for so many people. But the Q is important in the whole Star Trek universe. They effectively start the domino effect. They shift the chess pieces and start a new adventure. Imagine a child who's bored out of their mind. They have nothing to do and they're dying to be entertained. That is when they come up with the most chaotic set of actions and the most devious plans. Lancey's Q is exactly like that. The Q as a species has progressed so far that they do not feel like they have anything left to talk about. That causes them to feel bored, and Q is no different. Because of that, he starts off the new adventures in Picard's life. He breaks the rules and can be a very good manipulator when it comes time for him to be. And as he is nothing more than a bored god, toying around with the crew to be entertained.
I take it back, you're not a genius.
Exploring the backstory of this species. The origin of the species has yet to be discovered. While we have Q stating that Q was always there, Quinn stated that there was a time when Q was not always these non-corporeal beings. If we really had to look at the power of the Q and how they function, we could simply see that this species has evolved this way over a really long period of time. But how long can it be? 4 billion years, at least. According to Q, the species has evolved through several centuries. This evolution has allowed this species to reach purity. The Q race as a whole has a godlike status, and that's due to them being in their pure state. But being around for so long has its own flaws. For example, you'll be bored if you have done everything that there is to do, and there is the case where it comes to Q. Q's apathetic and bored because everything that was there to experience has experienced it. Everything that there is to discuss, he's already discussed it. So what does one do when they're bored? They bring chaos. We know that a quiet mind is the devil's workshop, and we could say that was the case for Q as well. Because Q was bored, he decided to use the people around him as toys and push them into new adventures to make himself feel worthwhile and alive.
I wasn't the one who misplaced the entire Deltivid asteroid belt.
Hey, this isn't about me. I got better places to be.
Cosmic chaos, deltoid asteroid belt. Imagine yourself being so bored that you decide to mess around with a whole asteroid belt. That's exactly what Q did. Q's boredom pushes him to interfere in the life of other species just because he can. Pitting wars between two species. History is not my strong forte, but I bet the whole situation of two kingdoms fighting because someone instigated them against one another has happened before. Now imagine the war in space, and instead of two kingdoms, it's two intelligent species, and you instigated a war between them just because you can. The level of messed up bored you have to be in order to do this is astounding, and yet here we are. Q has done it before. Q instigated wars between Romulians and Vulcans that lasted for 100 years. In another instance, because once was not enough, Q decided to start a war between the Vogines and the Wingari, interfering with humans. Now, as Q is omniscient, it will not be wrong to assume Q is omnipresent too, because at one point, Q could not visit one solar system without apologizing to another Q. In our solar system, the Q that we had was much better. The interactions that Q had with humans were far more positive. Instead of waging wars when it came to us, Q helped Isaac Newton find gravity by shaking the apple tree until the apple fell on his head. This Q was Quinn. He helped during the Civil War and also helped secure Woodstock in the 20th century. However, as Quinn became progressively depressed and suicidal in his later years, in the 21st century he was trapped in a comet. 2165 Guinan. We got to see Whoopi Goldberg take on the role of the titular Guinan, and we got to take a deep dive into the relationship of the L-Aryans and the Q. The two species have always had a relationship that cannot be explained in simple terms. It's complicated as what would explain the relationship dynamic between the two. The L-Aryan species can control their aging and time. They're not as powerful as the Q. However, they both engaged in a Cold War of sorts, which ended in a truce between two parties. This truce allowed the El-Aryans to have Q at their beck and call by doing a special ritual. In this episode, called Monsters, we learned that Q's powers are diminishing, which is why the ritual did not summon him. The meeting between Guinan and Q also showed that while Q has intelligence and an idea for the future, he could still be surprised because Q was surprised by how Guinan was. Federation 2364. The first time Q and Federation met was in 2364. Q, being the god he is, decided to put humanity to the test rather than a trial because, in his eyes, humans were nothing but a child race. He visited the Federation about 7 times in total. He even introduced them to the board on his 5th visit. Because of his notorious behavior, there was a meeting at Enterprise where every Starfleet captain was informed of who Q was, but his features were not described to the captains. We later find out that this is because we see Captain Janeway think that Quinn was a notorious Q at first when she met him. Q Civil War. The Q Civil War started because Quinn decided to commit suicide. His monotony in life was too much for him to deal with, and when he was able to be in his humanoid form, he took poison. This loss of life understandably rubbed the Q continuum the wrong way, and that led to the Civil War. This war included a lot of fire weapons. These fire weapons were inspired by the guns used in the American Civil War. These guns were able to kill or injure Qs, which was a rather new concept because prior to this episode, we'd only seen the Qs being executed using the power of their mind. But this Civil War proved that the Q is far superior when it comes to technology and can easily make something that can cause galactic crossfires and supernovas in our universes. This war only came to an end when Q decided to father a child. He thought that since the war began, because of the loss of life, welcoming a life would be deemed a fair trade. Last contact in the 26th century. As we could see, the Continuum has interacted with the Federation several times, and how each time has ended. However, in the 26th century, it was the last time they were in contact with the Federation. It could be the Q Continuum no longer wanted to be in the limelight while manipulating the human world, or it could be because they were waiting for the humans to cross over a threshold before they interacted with them again. The reason was unknown, but in 3190, while the crew was discussing the DMA, the absence of the Q Continuum was brought to light. What are some of the unique physiological traits of this species? When we were first introduced to Q, I'd be lying if I said that I wasn't surprised by the way Q looked. Apart from Q being played by the dashing John DeLancey, it was almost shocking how fewer prosthetics were used. You could almost expect that the Q, being one of the most powerful alien species, would have some alien or at least some less humanoid features, but that was not the case. In fact, we can almost look at Q and confuse them for fellow humans. The humanoid features often act in their favor, as that makes makes them less intimidating, even though there are several reasons why you should be intimidated. Now, point to be noted that Q can express itself in several different forms. However, Q usually chooses to stay as a human male. His fashion sense is on fleek because he's always dressed in the Starfleet uniform. As the Q does not age, I'm pretty sure the biggest reason why we get to see an aged version of Q in the latest episode is simply that he does not want to make Picard feel jealous of his infinite youth. There were bars on top of the character's head showing their threat level. Q would be the maximum one because Q is truly powerful. Q's omniscient, omnipotent, and immortal. I believe being all of these three things together gives the Q valid reasons to feel like they're above us humans, because they truly are. In Hyde and Q of TNG, Q mentioned that it considered us humans as non-entities. This was obviously because in front of the Q, we mere humans were nothing. Starting off as highly intelligent interdimensional beings, the Q is omniscient, omnipotent, and immortal. They are all-seeing and all-knowing. Even when a Q is turned human, Q has an IQ of 2005. I'm pretty sure that is one of our audience's birth years. To put it into perspective, while you and I might struggle even to do our honors in one subject, Amanda Rogers has done her honors in neurophysiology, plasma dynamics, and eco-regeneration. This was done by her when she was under the misconception that she was indeed human. Being a Q sounds a little mentally taxing, does it not? Being super intelligent means you have a lot of responsibilities, and with responsibility comes a lot of reprimands if you behave as chaotically as Q does. But then when you learn that as a Q, you will not feel ticklish or claustrophobic, and definitely will not get a runny nose every time the weather changes. That really makes being Q sound almost good. Well, good news for you, humans can ascend into Q. That's what Q mentions. And we get to see it happen when Riker ascends from a mere human like us to Q. Let's talk about that omnipotence of Qs really quickly. Turns out Qs are not as omnipotent as they claim to be. We get to see a very in-your-face example of that over quite a few episodes, namely Q2, True Q, Hiding Q, etc. Imagine someone with a huge ego and then you take away whatever it is that makes them so egotistical. That fact would be akin to death in my opinion. That's pretty much all that Q can do. They can temporarily take away the powers of a fellow Q as punishment, but suicide is not a thing that they can do. But then again, Q can grow weaker when they are close to their death. I mean, we do get to see Q losing his powers at the end of Pick Mercy. The Q was weakened enough for even a human to kill him. That is what Jean-Luc Picard was told by Q. But then the death was a bamboozle because 1 year later, there was Q scolding Jack Crusher for even thinking about his death in a linear fashion. When it comes to Quinn, the Q that Captain Janeway meets in the Voyager episode Death Wish, he's bored with his life. He is drone and decides he wants to die. In order to do that, Quinn had to intake poison in his humanoid form. So the clear idea of what a Q can do and cannot do is very blurred. Another main physiological aspect where the Q differs from us is when it comes to reproduction. Well, unlike us humans, Q do not feel the urge to mate or procreate. Q are way beyond sex is the view of Q when it comes to sex. The concept of sex is so foreign when it comes to the Q that when it's suggested, Q stated that he would not know how to. In theory, the mating between two Qs can last for decades. Q has channeled his inner Casanova and mentioned that while he did not find any urge to mate with other Q, that never stopped him from going for women of other species. I mean, a little diversity has never hurt anyone, has it? Q's omnipotence has always drawn females to him like a moth to a flame. I suppose that's why when Q mentioned that he wanted to be with Catherine Janeway, he also decided to mention that he could have had anybody else, such as a Klingon Targ, Romulus Empress of a Cerulean microbe. The IQ can be high, but the flirtation skills, not so much. In the eye of Q, Q can only procreate with species that is capable of copulation. This is why we do get to see one instance of two Qs getting together, but as humans. Their form of mating? Touching their forefingers. Of course, Q found it dirty and satisfying. Sounds familiar, doesn't it? How powerful is the Q species? To put it very simply, the Q species as a whole are quite powerful. Their status is almost godlike in the Star Trek universe, and aptly so. Their levels of power are beyond human comprehension. Honestly, the best way to explain their power would be to say they have cosmic abilities. They could think of something and it would happen. Resting and destroying matter is child's play for them. Q has control over space-time as well as matter, so this does not come as a surprise. They can easily harness the power of multiple universes, and we get to see it with the way they travel. With a snap of their fingers, they can teleport through space and time. Traveling to different dimensions is almost like taking a Sunday walk for them. Their control over matter can extend beyond controlling small things. No, the Qs play with the big boys. Big boy being planet. A Q can easily change the course of a planet and adjust its orbit to his will. Q definitely has an idea about the future. They may not have an idea of the future, but they have an idea of the several futures that are available to them, which is a huge thing that can control time. This makes them definitely stronger in comparison to us humans. However, despite the knowledge of multiple futures, Q never knows which future will be taken, as Q does look at time in a linear fashion. So there are definitely moments of surprise for Q. Both Delancey's Q and Quinn showcase the importance and powerful nature of Q as a species, almost acting as the flip side of the same coin, with Delancey's Q being more chaotic and Quinn being more benevolent. Q can also punch a hole in the gene pool. That punching allows the Q to change anyone from a higher life form to a lower life form. If a Q is whimsical, it can change the space and time continuum, destroy a planet, and mess up a primordial species just because it can. Q can really help with global warming with its powers because Q can restore the natural atmosphere of a heavily polluted area. It can also move the tectonic plates if it feels like playing around a little. Temporal loops and subspace inversions are something that Q can do with a snap of their finger. Along with so many powers, the Q has the power of suggestion. They are knowledgeable beings, so if they want to be manipulative, they can do so with ease. The power of Q is so vast that it can almost not be quantified. However, it can be stripped away or gifted to others. We get to see that happen when William T. Riker is given the opportunity to become a Q and experience the powers of the Q. Not only can the Qs control their age and appearance, but they can also do the same to the mortals. A Q can change your age, give you your eyesight back, and seal your mouth, as in remove your mouth if they feel like doing it. If you have ever wanted to be a completely different species, give yourself a Q, because Q could turn you from a human to a seagull if you want. Qs have shown a huge control over technology, whether it's stopping the functionality of the shields or transporting the ship several miles through space. It all comes easy to Q because Q is just that powerful. With such a huge list of power, you have to think how far this species has come overall. We are only looking at the individuals here, but what about the species as a whole? If we really had to think about it for a second, we would realize that the Q is the future. Q was a material life form at one point. From there, it became this extra-dimensional, extraterrestrial life form that is extremely technologically advanced and civilized. But how did it manage to do that? Now, saying which path they took is very difficult because there could be several. However, if we pay close attention to whatever traits the Q has, we could say one thing for sure. In the Kardashev scale, the Q is definitely a higher type. But before we get into that, let me explain the Kardashev scale. To explain the Kardashev scale, simply, it is almost like a measuring unit to measure how far civilization has progressed. See, the progression of a civilization is not based on the population count. It's based on the technological advancement of civilization. For us humans, the turning point was figuring out how to start a fire. From lighting fire, we have come so far that we have smartphones and computers, etc. But is this how far we can go? That's not quite true. Our human civilization has gone a long way to go. The Russian astronomer Nikolai Kardashev built this scale. See, the original scale that he had made only had 3 types present: Type 1, Type 2, and Type 3. But how do these differ? When it comes to Type 1 civilization, it is a civilization that can use and utilize the total energy that is present on its home planet. When it comes to a Type 2 civilization, they can harness and use the energy stored in their home planet as well as their star system around them. When it comes to Type 3, you guessed it, it would expand to the whole home galaxy. If I had to put it into perspective, that is easily understandable. We humans are Type 0 because we can barely use the energy that is given to us by our home planet. We have used fossil fuels, air, and water, sure, but there's so many other ways our planet provides us with the energy we need. For example, geothermal gases. We've not been able to harvest a good fraction of the total geothermal reserve of our planet, let alone the whole of it. Imagine the endless possibilities we would have when we could access the whole reserve of our planet's energy source. Now, why am I telling you about this? Because, as I mentioned before, the Q is either Type 4 or a Type 5 civilization. What that means is that they can harness and utilize the energy of at least one universe, Type 4, or several universes, Type 5. I know it sounds crazy, but if you look at the Star Trek universe, you will notice that the Federation is itself over Type 2 when it comes to technological advancements. So really, the Q being a Type 4 or 5 is expected. Because of this above-class rating, it's very clear that the species itself is one of the most powerful species in the Star Trek universe. This gives us a very basic idea idea of how strong the species is as a whole. Despite being this strong and capable, we do get to see Q lose his cool over something: the Borg. In episode Q2, we're introduced to Q Jr., who is unruly adolescent. As moody kids often rebel, he too rebelled, except his rebellious acts were not stealing booze from the cabinet or smoking up. It was more like getting rid of Neelix's mouth, irritating and annoying the Seven, and obviously getting 3 Borg cubes on the ship. This led to Q scolding Q Jr. and telling him not to mess with the Borg. It begs the question, what can the Borg do that led to this godlike species wanting not to mess with them? But there is one thing that limits the power of this species: the continuum itself. You would think that with such godlike abilities, the Q have nothing to worry about, nothing to stop them. But you'd be wrong. Over and over again, we've seen that the continuum is harsh to its people. Amanda Rogers' parents, the 2 Qs who decided to live their life out as humans, were executed in a tornado made of their own power. Quinn was trapped in a comet when he wanted to escape the monotony of the life of a Q by committing suicide. Q Jr. was almost turned into an amoeba. So we can clearly conclude that while being super powerful, there are limits to these powers because the continuum sort of dictates how they can lead their life. When they're out of line, the continuum takes it on them to pass judgment and punishment.
Q! But I feel like celebrating. I don't. All right.
Conclusion. Some of us consume media to escape from our mundane day-to-day life and experience something different. Star Trek has done that for a lot of people since its premiere. Since 1966, Star Trek has garnered a huge fan base because of its beautifully crafted storyline and amazing characters. Q has been a fan favorite for a lot of people because Q truly is a god amongst men. Whether it's the benevolent Quinn, rebellious Q Jr. of Delancey's chaotic Q, all of these characters have successfully captured our hearts and piqued our interests in the species. We hope with this origin video you have a better idea about these non-corporeal entities. And if you liked our content, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to us if you haven't already. Have a good one and be safe. Thanks everyone.